morning, Abby. It's Monday, and welcome to my review of The Complete Sherlock Holmes, Volume 2. And I know that sounds like a really awkward and clunky title for a book, but no, that is actually what the book is called. You may be wondering, Molly, why in the heck are you reviewing Volume 2 when you haven't reviewed Volume 1 yet? And that is because I borrowed this from a friend of mine, and while that friend does have Volume 1, she could not find it. So this is what I have and what I read, and this is what I'm going to review, and yes, it does irritate me as well, but we're all just going to have to kind of deal with it. So this is basically just an anthology of the second half of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories, covering the return of Sherlock Holmes, the Valley of Fear, his last bow, and the casebook of Sherlock Holmes. I imagine I don't need to tell you what the Sherlock Holmes stories are about. It's Sherlock being weird and doing detective things, while John Watson is there. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like Dr. Watson. He's a good author, and he helps Sherlock keep what little bit of sanity he has left. But, like, when you think about it, he doesn't really do that much, or at the very least, he chooses to gloss over his contributions to the story. And, like, even when he does do something, Sherlock just gets mad at him for not doing it the way that he would have. But, oh my goodness, I am getting ahead of myself. Let's backpedal and actually take a second to talk about these characters. Sherlock Holmes is a character that I feel like in an adaptation would be very hard to both write properly and portray properly. Because he seems very not human compared to everyone else around him. He doesn't feel like a person, and yet he is very human. And no matter how much he tries to make himself seem not so, and the only person who gets to see his more human side is Dr. Watson, and even then, it's only like once or twice. One thing I love about Sherlock Holmes is that, like, despite living in London for so long and being so good at what he does, in the end, he just kind of moves out to the country and becomes a beekeeper of all things. Like, that's so random and adorable. How can you not love it? Somewhat amusingly, there's this, like, running theme, I guess you would call it, throughout these stories where Sherlock will just occasionally just kind of put Watson down and make him feel bad about himself without even realizing that that is what he's doing. Like, I remember this was very early on into the book, probably only like 2 or 3 stories in. I couldn't find it again, unfortunately, but I remember this distinctly. Sherlock and Watson were having a conversation, and Sherlock was critiquing how Watson tells the story to the reader, and then Watson was like, well, if you don't like how I tell the story, why don't you write your own book? And then Sherlock just responds completely deadpan, completely serious. Oh, I am. Like, who does that? Sherlock Holmes, apparently. But the thing with Sherlock Holmes is that even with his closest friend, he's very impersonal. He tells it how it is. But even though he doesn't know how to express it, and it's not clearly evident to people who don't know them well, he does need Watson. He really does. Like, they even say in the book that Sherlock does his best thinking when he has Watson there to just sit and rebuff his thoughts. And really, it's just really adorable, and oh my goodness, I'm getting into the gay stuff way too early. Let's talk about Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson definitely would not be that hard of a character to portray, because he's like that type of character where, like, they have just enough personality where you can't call them a blank slate, but, like, you really want to. Like, random examples, Harry Potter, Jeremy Hare from Be More Chill, like, they're both kind of blank slate characters, but they have enough personality about them to where you can't call them that. Dr. Watson is kind of like that. Gotta say, in this video, I did not expect to seriously compare John Watson to Jeremy Hare, but there you go. However, I feel like he would be a hard character to adapt into a non-textual medium without it seeming kind of clunky, because, like, in a book, like, someone has to narrate the thing, so it's okay to have a character who, for the most part, does nothing but narrate. Like Lemony Snicket, I guess. But, like, then when you adapt that into another medium, like, you don't purely rely on a narrator to tell your story, so now you just kind of have this one random character standing around doing nothing. Kind of like Lemony Snicket. I am making a lot of weird comparisons in this video involving John Watson. When you take away the narration aspect from Watson, what you're left with is just his emotional impact on Sherlock and how they contrast each other and how they play off of each other. He's the support role, and he's good at that, but unfortunately, when you take away Sherlock, he doesn't really have much personality on his own, which is kind of good because you don't want him to overpower Sherlock, who is, you know, kind of the main character, but the downside is that it leaves me without much to talk about in regards to him in this segment. And yet, somehow, Dr. Watson is still my favorite character. I literally don't know how this happened. It's just like, as soon as he appeared on page, I was just kind of like, yo, you're my favorite character now, deal with it. Moving on to the actual writing itself. I just talked about all the characterization, so I guess technically this isn't the start of a segment. I started the segment a while ago. But anyway, like, moving on to talking about the actual plots, the mysteries that Conan Doyle comes up with for Sherlock to solve are very creative and very interesting to read about, and I never felt like the author was running out of curveballs to throw at Holmes, even though he apparently actually was, and that right there is a testament to Conan Doyle's skill, because, like, when I run out of ideas for videos, you can tell, because I start doing things like reviewing Kids Box CDs. But what impressed me personally with Conan Doyle's writing is how good he is at describing, like, the certain types of feelings that different characters give off. Like, you know how when you meet a person and, like, they're just really happily and bubbly and they just give off this energy of being really nice? Or, like, you meet someone and they just give off this energy of being, like, a terrible, terrible person? Conan Doyle is very good at capturing that into words. Like, let's just read an example from the text. This particular quote is from The Adventure of the Illustrious Client. It is hardly necessary to describe him, for many will remember that large, bluff, honest personality, that broad, clean-shaven face, and, above all, that pleasant, mellow voice. Frankness shone from his gray Irish eyes, and good humor played round his mobile, smiling lips. His loosened top hat, his dark frock coat, indeed, every detail, from the pearl pin in the black satin cravat to the lavender spats over the varnished shoes, spoke of the meticulous care in dress for which he was famous. The big, masterful aristocrat dominated the little room. Now I really want to read the first volume of this, because I want to know how Sherlock Holmes is described for the very first time, because something tells me it has to be freaking masterfully written. Another thing that impressed me a lot was that there are a few stories in here that are actually narrated by Sherlock instead of Watson, and Conan Doyle did a very good job of differentiating between the two's writing styles, because Sherlock is not nearly as good of an author as his friend. A side effect of that is that Sherlock's stories can sometimes be almost painful to read because they're not as well written as what you've been reading all the way up to this point. But there's only like 3 of them in this giant 600-page book that has text that is formatted like this, so it's really not that bad. Despite the sheer amount of murders that happen in these stories, they're surprisingly relaxing reads. Like, it's super fun to just kind of sit back and watch Sherlock work his magic. Although I did know that these stories seem to have quite the fixation for destroying people's heads during murder. Like, I'm not kidding. If someone was murdered in this book, there's like a 70% chance that their head got smashed in the process. It's not described in detail or anything. Like, they just kind of say his head's broken. But, like, it's still just a kind of weird thing that I noticed. Also, can I just say that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and by extension Sherlock Holmes, is one of the most quotable human beings to have ever existed. So I like to call this my VFD commonplace book because I'm Lemony Snicket Trash. Basically, it's just a little book that I write down whatever in, and like, I accidentally had to dedicate an entire section of this thing to Sherlock Holmes quotes, because so many times I would just come across a sentence that I liked and I had to write it down. In fact, let's read some quotes together, shall we? Despite being written in the early 1900s, these stories aren't as misogynistic or racist as I was expecting them to be, that's pretty impressive. In fact, Conan Doyle actually seems to be arguing for women's rights in some points. Conan Doyle was a huge supporter of divorce reform in real life, and he would occasionally sneak hints to that into his stories. Like, there is this story, I can't find it, I'm sorry, guys. I looked through the entire book, I couldn't find the thing. But, like, there is this woman who is being abused by her husband pretty much daily. And, like, she's had some line about how can you people force me to stay married to this monster? And I was like, heck yeah, you go, Sir Conan Doyle. However, I do have to say that there was one story that had a character who was black who just happened to be a massive jumble of racist perceptions of people of color that were commonly held at the time. So, yeah, that story was a little bit hard to read from a modern perspective. Not a little bit, actually. That story was kind of difficult to read, to be honest. But, like, outside of that story, it wasn't that bad. Like, there was one story where they had some person of color who was into, like, voodoo or something. I don't know if that's racist per se, but that was a thing. And they would occasionally throw around some words that are, you know, offensive today. But, like, other than that, there really wasn't that much that I think could, like, hinder someone's enjoyment of the story. And same thing with the misogynism stuff. There were some, like, background references thrown in, but, like, it wasn't, it was refreshing reading something that was written a long time ago that wasn't completely racist and misogynist. So, like, once again, good on you, Sir Conan Doyle. I don't know if any of y'all noticed this, but there are a lot of little random bookmarks here, and you may have seen them and been like, Molly, what's up with that? Well, y'all should know me by this point. I've been doing this little YouTube channel thingy for, like, what, a year? And so, knowing me, you guys should know that I gotta talk about the gay stuff. I just gotta. So in all fairness, both Sherlock and Watson talk about finding women attractive in these stories at least once. So I guess technically they're not gay, they're like bi or pan or something else, but y'all get my point. You know what I'm getting at. They're in love. Basically, these bookmarks are all the time when I was reading the stories and something incredibly gay happened, and I knew that if I was going to make a book review on this, I needed to bring them up. So, I guess we're just going to quickly run through all of Sherlock and Watson's gayest hits. Let's go. The Second Stain. Now, Watson, the fair sex is your department, said Holmes with a smile. Y'all heard the man. The Valley of Fear. I am not a whole-souled admirer of womankind, as you are aware, Watson. Oh, as Watson is aware. Exactly how is he aware, Mr. Holmes? So in the story, The Dying Detective, Sherlock is, like, sick and dying and stuff, as the title implies. And Watson tries to help him, but Sherlock tells him not to and to stay away, and then Watson just does it because he trusts Sherlock's judgment so much. Goodness me, I am too obsessed with this character, and I literally don't even know why. You are not angry? He, Sherlock, asked, gasping for breath. Poor devil, how could I be angry when I saw him lying in such a plight before me? John Watson, you adorable little... Later in that same story, Sherlock is trying to get Watson to do something for him, and he literally says, quick man, if you love me. Like, okay, taking historical context into account, that's actually not as gay as it sounds, but, like, I still just, like, convulse with delight every time I read that. In another story, The Devil's Foot, Sherlock finds this, like, powder at a crime scene, and because he's smart, he decides to just, like, put it in, like, the lantern in his and Watson's house and just see what the hell it does to them. Because that's how the scientific method works, guys. The real name of this powder is the Devil's Foot, like the title. But, like, I like to call it Dementor Dust because basically what it does is it gives Sherlock and Watson these, like, visions that scare the ever-living crap out of them and makes them feel hopeless. But then, like, at the last second, Watson snaps out of it and he drags himself and Sherlock out of the building. Upon my word, Watson, said Holmes at last with an unsteady voice, I owe you both my thanks and an apology. It was an unjustifiable experiment even for oneself and doubly so for a friend. I am really very sorry. You know, I answered with some emotion, for I have never seen so much of Holmes's heart before, that it is my greatest joy and privilege to help you. These two are going to be the death of me, I swear to God. The Blanched Soldier is one of the few stories narrated by Sherlock, and in it he says, the good Watson had at that time deserted me for a wife, the only selfish action which I can recall in our association. I was alone. Is it just me, or did the way he phrased that make him sound just a tad bit salty? You make one selfish action in our entire friendship, and it's leaving me alone here. In the Free Garrett Debs, or however it's a made-up word, it doesn't matter how it's pronounced. Anyway, Watson gets shot in the leg, and, like, Sherlock's response, and then Watson's response to his response. You know what, just listen to it, because I have no words. You're not hurt, Watson? For God's sake, say that you are not hurt. It was worth a wound. It was worth many wounds to know the depth of loyalty and love which lay behind that cold mask. The clear, hard eyes were dimmed for a moment, and the firm lips were shaking. For the one and only time, I caught a glimpse of a great heart, as well as of a great brain. All my years of humble but single-minded service culminated in that moment of revelation. It's nothing, Holmes. It's a mere scratch. He had ripped up my trousers with his pocket knife. You are right, he cried with an immense sigh of relief. It is quite superficial. His face sunk like flint as he glared at our prisoner, who was sitting up with a dazed face. By the Lord, it is as well for you. If you had killed Watson, you would not have got out of this room alive. Do I need to say anything else? Like, that just speaks for itself. They are so dang cute. In Four Bridge, John literally describes Sherlock as the man whom above all others I revere. Gosh freaking darn it, why is this not canon? The Bruce Partington plans. I knew you would not shrink at the last, said he, Sherlock, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes which was nearer to tenderness than I had ever seen. Sherlock Holmes is a very, very closed-off person. He does not show normal human emotions to most people, nonetheless tenderness, but he shows them to Watson because Watson is the one person that he, cares a substantial amount about. Watson brings out the best in him. For God's sakes, there's even a part in this story where Watson acknowledges that himself. I'm sorry that I said this story. I got a little upset. It's a different story, but it's in this book. I'm sorry, I get a little angry over this sometimes, in case you couldn't tell. This new story, The Creeping Man, takes place after Watson has left Baker Street, but Holmes will still sometimes call Watson in to help him on cases. And Watson is talking about how sometimes his role in assisting Holmes is obvious and sometimes it isn't. He liked to think aloud in my presence. His remarks could hardly be said to be made to me. Many of them would have been as appropriately addressed to his bedstead. But nonetheless, having formed the habit, it had become in some way helpful that I should register and interject. If I irritated him by a certain methodical slowness in my mentality, that irritation served only to make his own flame-like intuition and impressions flash up the more vividly and swiftly. Such was my humble role in our alliance. Watson brings out the best in Sherlock in ways that neither of them even freaking understand, and good God, they are just so beautiful that I can't even function anymore. I'm dead now. Good day. I feel like it should be mentioned that there are multiple times in this book where Sherlock and Watson will meet up at a restaurant and discuss things about cases there, so they're literally almost going on freaking dates. In case all the stuff that I just said hasn't made you start shipping them yet, there is one moment in The Valley of Fear that is quite possibly the single cutest thing that I have ever read in a book, ever. Like, I made an entire YouTube video ranting about Violet Baudelaire and Sweater Boy. They cannot even compete with this. So, Holmes heads out to investigate a case without Watson, and he comes back home very late at night, and when he does, this happens. It was late that night when Holmes returned from his solitary excursion. We slept in a double-bedded room, which was the best that the little country inn could do for us. Okay, so I know that part sounds gay on its own, but remember, historical context, back in the day, it was not, considered gay for men to sleep in the same bed. That is not why I am reading you that passage. This passage. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I was already asleep when I was partly awakened by his entrance. Well, Holmes, I murmured, have you found anything out? He stood beside me in silence, his candle in his hand. Then the tall, lean figure inclined towards me. I say, Watson, he whispered, would you be afraid to sleep in the same room with a lunatic, a man with softening of the brain, an idiot whose mind has lost its grip? Not in the least, I answered in astonishment. Ah, that's lucky, he said, and not another word would he utter that night. How do you expect me to read that and not ship it? Come on, Sir Conan Doyle. You cannot lie to us anymore. We can see you. The devil's foot again. I have never loved. Mr. Holmes, I don't claim to be a master of deduction like you do, but I am like 90% sure that your boyfriend is standing right next to you. These two are so cute that I think that if I ever watch the BBC Sherlock, I'm going to, literally just explode. But unfortunately, this pairing is not meant to be, since John had to go and get married to some random woman and destroy both my and Sherlock's hopes and dreams.
What you say? Oh, that you only meant well, and cause you did. What you say? That it's all for the
Today on dead memes that Molly just discovered like 2 days ago and has now decided to shove into her YouTube video awkwardly. Anyway, now that I've spent like 2.5 pages of script trying to convince y'all of what Tumblr discovered like ages ago, I should probably like do what I actually said I was gonna do in the title and like actually review this bad boy, shouldn't I? The complete Sherlock Holmes Volume 2, and really any of the Sherlock Holmes stories, if this book is any indication, is a surprisingly light and relaxing read despite the amounts of violent murder and stuff that goes on in it. You may want to keep a dictionary or keyboard handy for some of the bigger and more archaic words, but otherwise, this book is very inventive and fun to read just whenever, and I would definitely recommend them to everyone on the planet Earth, particularly fans of mysteries. And I mean, hey, if you're just looking for more gay things to ship, well, here you go. And with that, Abby, I will see you on Friday.